Do you know Idi Amin of Uganda ate human flesh? That's the rumor. They say he kept the severed heads of his political enemies in a black freezer inside his private quarters, pulling them out to talk to them.
You disobey me and you end up in my freezer and then I eat you for breakfast.
When his paranoia reached its absolute peak, to feed on their flesh to absorb their strength. But how does a human being cross the line from a charismatic leader into a literal monster? And what was it like for the ordinary people who had to look into his eyes every single day, knowing that a single wrong word could mean their death? This is not just a story about a dictator. This is the story of Uganda's darkest decade, seen through the eyes of a young man who was forced to become the personal doctor to the butcher of Kampala himself. It is a story of terror, of secrets whispered in the dark, and ultimately, of the unbreakable strength of the human spirit. The air in Kampala during the rainy season of 1972 was thick, warm, and smelled of red earth and exhaust fumes from military jeeps. Dr. Benjamin Achua was only 26 years old. He had soft eyes, hands that never shook, and a deep, quiet love for medicine. He did not care about politics. While the radio played military marches celebrating the new president, General Idi Amin Dada, Benjamin cared only about the patients in the crowded wards of Malego Hospital. He believed that if he kept his head down and focused on his stitches, the storm sweeping through his country would pass him by. He was wrong. It was a Tuesday night when the lights in the hospital flickered and died. Power outages were becoming common in Kampala, so Benjamin did not panic. He simply lit a kerosene lamp, the warm yellow flame casting long, dancing shadows against the cracked concrete walls of the operating room. He was sewing up the deep laceration on a young boy's leg when the heavy wooden doors of the ward were kicked open. The sound shattered the quiet night. 3 men stepped into the dim light. They wore colorful floral shirts, dark sunglasses despite the night, and heavy gold chains around their necks. Every Ugandan knew who they were. They were agents of the State Research Bureau, Idi Amin's secret police. The hospital staff froze. The nurses held their breath, their eyes wide with terror. The tallest of the agents stepped forward, his boots squeaking loudly on the clean tile floor. He did not ask questions. He simply pointed a thick, calloused finger at Benjamin. "You," the agent said, his voice flat and empty. "Pack your bag. You are coming with us." "I am in the middle of a procedure," Benjamin said, trying to keep his voice steady, though his heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. "This boy needs stitches. He will bleed if I do not finish." The agent did not argue. He walked over, grabbed the surgical thread from Benjamin's hands, and threw it to the floor. Then, he drew a heavy pistol from under his shirt and pressed the cold steel barrel against Benjamin's temple. "The president has a headache," the agent whispered. "And you are the best doctor in Kampala. If you do not come, the boy dies, you die, and we will find another doctor." Benjamin looked at the crying boy on the table, then at the cold eyes of the agent. He knew he had no choice. He packed his small medical bag with trembling hands, said a silent prayer, and allowed himself to be pushed out into the rain. They drove in silence through the empty, wet streets of Kampala. The city was under a strict curfew. The only vehicles on the road were military trucks filled with soldiers holding automatic rifles. Benjamin stared out the window, watching the rain wash over the dark storefronts. He wondered if he would ever see his family again. He wondered if his name would be added to the growing list of people who simply disappeared in the middle of the night. The car finally pulled up to the grand gates of the State House in Entebbe. The palace was massive, surrounded by high white walls and manicured gardens. But the beauty was a mask. Soldiers stood at every corner, their faces hidden by the shadows of their helmets. Benjamin was led through grand hallways lined with red carpets and sparkling crystal chandeliers. The luxury was overwhelming, but to Benjamin, it felt like a golden cage. They stopped before a massive set of double doors. The guard knocked twice. A deep, booming voice from inside shouted for them to enter. The room was vast, filled with heavy mahogany furniture and the smell of roasted meat and expensive cologne. Standing by the window, looking out into the dark garden, was a giant of a man. Idi Amin Dada. He was over 6 feet 4 inches tall, with broad, muscular shoulders that filled his green military uniform. His chest was covered in medals that caught the light of the chandelier. When Amin turned around, Benjamin felt his breath catch in his throat. The president's face was wide and expressive, a massive smile stretching across his lips. But his eyes were completely different. They were large, dark, and utterly restless, darting around the room as if searching for hidden enemies in the corners. "Ah! The young doctor!" Amin roared, his voice filling the room like thunder. He walked over and slapped Benjamin on the shoulder with a force that nearly knocked the wind out of him. "They tell me you have the softest hands in the country. That you can fix any wound. Is this true?" I do my best to heal, Mr. President," Benjamin stammered, keeping his eyes respectfully lowered. "Good. Because I am surrounded by fools and traitors." Amin's smile vanished instantly, replaced by a dark, brooding scowl that made his face look terrifyingly heavy. He gripped Benjamin's chin, forcing the young doctor to look him in the eyes. "My head feels like it is going to explode. The British, the Israelis, they are trying to poison me. They send bad spirits into my bedroom. You must fix it." Benjamin opened his medical bag. His hands were shaking, but as soon as he touched his stethoscope, his medical training took over. He checked Amin's blood pressure, listened to his heart, and examined his eyes. The president's heart was beating incredibly fast, and his blood pressure was dangerously high. But physically, there was no sign of poison. The poison was in the man's mind. It was extreme paranoia, fueled by sleeplessness and power. Benjamin prepared a mild sedative to help the president sleep. As he drew the clear liquid into the syringe, Amin watched him like a hawk. "If this is poison, doctor," Amin whispered, his voice suddenly very soft, "very dangerous, you will drink the rest of the bottle before you die." "It is a medicine to help you rest, sir," Benjamin said calmly, though sweat dripped down his neck. "I will take a small drop myself to show you." Benjamin placed a drop of the sedative on his own tongue. Amin watched him closely for a minute. Then, he let out another booming laugh, slapping his knee. "A brave boy. I like you. Go on, give me the medicine." Benjamin administered the injection. Within 20 minutes, the giant man began to yawn. He walked over to his massive bed, collapsing onto it like a fallen tree. Before he closed his eyes, he pointed a finger at Benjamin. "You sleep in the room next to mine. From now on, you are my shadow. If I live, you live. If I die, you die first." Weeks turned into months, and Benjamin's life became a waking nightmare of suspense and survival. He was no longer a doctor at Malago Hospital, he was a prisoner in a golden cage. He was given a lavish room, expensive clothes, and the finest food, but he was never allowed to leave the palace grounds without an armed escort. He was forced to accompany Amin everywhere, carrying his medical bag, ready to treat the dictator's constant headaches, stomach pains, and bouts of wild, manic energy. Benjamin quickly learned that Idi Amin was a man of two faces. During the day, Amin could be incredibly charming. Benjamin watched him walk through the streets of Kampala, throwing money to the crowds, laughing, dancing with traditional dancers, and playing the accordion for children. The people cheered for him, seeing him as a strong African giant who had stood up to the British colonialists. They called him the Big Daddy. But at night, when the crowds were gone and the palace gates were locked, the monster emerged. The State House became a place of whispers. Benjamin would sit in his room, listening to the heavy footsteps of soldiers dragging people down the hallways. He would hear muffled screams, the sound of breaking glass, and then, the terrifying silence that followed. He knew what was happening. Amin's paranoia was growing daily. He suspected his ministers, his generals, and even his wives of plotting against him. One evening, Benjamin was summoned to Amin's private dining room. It was late, past midnight. The palace was quiet, save for the hum of the air conditioners. When Benjamin entered, he found Amin sitting alone at a long mahogany table. The room was dimly lit, and a single silver platter sat in front of the president. The smell in the room was strange. It was sweet, heavy, and metallic. It made Benjamin's stomach turn, though he did not know why. Amin was eating. He used no fork or knife, using his large, grease-covered hands to tear at a piece of dark meat. He did not look up when Benjamin entered. He just kept chewing, his jaw moving slowly, his eyes fixed on the wall. "Come here, Benjamin," Amin said, his voice surprisingly quiet. Benjamin walked closer, his heart thumping loudly. He looked at the meat on the platter. It did not look like beef, or goat, or chicken. It was dark, almost purple, with thick fibers. "Do you know what makes a man strong, doctor?" Amin asked, wiping grease from his mouth with the back of his hand. "A balanced diet, sir, and plenty of rest," Benjamin replied, keeping his voice as neutral as possible. Amin let out a low, chilling chuckle. It wasn't his usual booming laugh. It was a sound that came from deep within his chest, cold and hollow. "No," Amin whispered. "Power makes a man strong. But power is a physical thing. It lives in the blood. It lives in the muscles. When your enemies try to kill you, they leave their strength in their meat. If you eat them, you take their strength. You take their courage. They can never betray you again because they become a part of you." A cold sweat broke out across Benjamin's forehead. He felt the room spinning. He looked at the meat on the platter again. The rumors. The terrifying rumors whispered by the nurses at the hospital, the rumors whispered by the servants in the kitchen, they were true. "Taste it," Amin said, pushing the silver platter toward Benjamin. The silence in the room was deafening. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner sounded like a countdown. Benjamin knew that if he refused, he would be labeling himself an enemy. He would be labeling himself a traitor. But if he touched it, he would lose his humanity. He would become just like the monster sitting in front of him. "I cannot, Mr. President," Benjamin said, his voice trembling but clear. Amin's eyes widened. He slowly stood up, towering over the young doctor. The air in the room felt heavy, suffocating. "Why?" Amin growled, his hand drifting toward the pistol strapped to his hip. "Are you too pure for my food? Do you think you are better than me?" "No, sir," Benjamin said, quickly thinking of his medical training. "It is my blood. I have a rare condition of the liver. If I eat rich, heavy meat at night, my liver will fail, and I will not be able to treat you. I must keep my hands steady for your injections." Amin stared at him. The tension in the room was so thick it felt like it could be cut with a knife. For 10 agonizing seconds, the dictator did not move. Then, slowly, the tension broke. Amin burst into a loud, mocking laugh. "Ah! The doctor and his weak liver!" Amin shouted, sitting back down. "Go! Get out of my sight! Go drink your water and eat your vegetables." Benjamin bowed quickly and rushed out of the room. The moment he closed the heavy wooden door behind him, he collapsed against the wall, sliding down to the floor. He gasped for air, his chest heaving. He looked at his hands. They were shaking violently. He had survived the night, but he knew he was living on borrowed time. The next morning, the horror deepened. One of Amin's wives, Amin, went missing. She had been a kind woman, one of the few people in the palace who had shown Benjamin any warmth. She had often smiled at him in the corridors, asking about his family. Now, she was gone. The palace staff was forbidden from speaking her name. 3 days later, Benjamin was called to the basement of the Nile mansion, a state villa where Amin spent much of his time. The air in the basement was freezing, chilled by massive industrial air conditioning units. Benjamin was led down a long concrete corridor by 2 armed guards. The sound of their boots echoed off the damp walls. At the end of the corridor was a heavy metal door with a small glass window. The guard unlocked it, pushing Benjamin inside. The room was a medical examination theater, but it looked like a butcher shop. On the metal table in the center of the room lay a body covered in a white sheet. Standing next to the table was a senior government pathologist, a man Benjamin knew from his days at the university. The pathologist's face was completely pale, his eyes hollow with shock. "The president wants you to witness this," the pathologist whispered, his voice cracking. "He wants you to confirm the cause of death." Benjamin walked slowly to the table. His hands shook as he reached out and pulled back the white sheet. He had to force himself not to scream. He had to bite his own tongue so hard that he tasted copper. It was Idi Amin. Her body had been brutally mutilated. Her limbs had been severed and sewn back on in the wrong places, her arms where her legs should be, her legs where her arms should be. It was a horrific, ritualistic display of absolute madness and cruelty. "He did this to warn her family," the pathologist whispered, tears streaming down his face. "He wants everyone to see what happens to those who defy him." Benjamin felt a wave of nausea wash over him. He gripped the edge of the metal table to keep from falling. He looked at the face of the dead woman, once so full of life, now frozen in an expression of eternal terror. In that freezing room, surrounded by the smell of blood and formaldehyde, Benjamin made a decision. He could no longer just try to survive. He could no longer remain a silent witness to this evil. He had to do something. He had to find a way to fight back, even if it cost him his life. The turning point came in late 1978. The clouds of war were gathering over Uganda. Amin's erratic behavior had pushed the country's economy into complete collapse. There was no sugar, no soap, no medicine in the hospitals. To distract the people from their suffering, Amin declared war on neighboring Tanzania, launching a foolish invasion. But the Tanzanian army, joined by Ugandan exiles, fought back with fierce determination. They began pushing Amin's forces back, marching steadily toward Kampala. Inside the palace, the atmosphere was chaotic. Paranoia had turned into a raging wildfire. Amin was rarely sober, drinking heavily and consuming massive quantities of meat. He stayed awake for days, pacing the hallways, shouting at ghosts, and ordering the execution of anyone he suspected of contacting the advancing enemy. Benjamin knew that when the regime fell, Amin would leave no witnesses. The personal doctor who knew his secrets, who knew the truth about his madness and his horrific rituals, would be the first to be eliminated. Benjamin had to escape. But how? The palace was surrounded by Amin's most loyal troops, the Nubian guards, who were ready to fight to the death. One rainy afternoon, while Amin was in a military briefing, Benjamin was summoned to the palace kitchen. A young woman named Sarah worked there. She was a quiet, observant girl from a village in eastern Uganda. Her brother had been taken by the State Research Bureau a year prior, and she, like Benjamin, carried a quiet, burning hatred for the regime. "Doctor," Sarah whispered, pretending to hand him a cup of tea while the guard stood outside the kitchen door. "My uncle is a driver for the military supply trucks. He is coming tonight to deliver fuel. He has a compartment in the back of his truck. It is dirty, it is dangerous, but it is the only way out." Benjamin looked at her. Her eyes were filled with a mixture of terror and hope. "And you?" Benjamin whispered back. "What will happen to you if they find out you helped me?" "I am coming with you," Sarah said, her voice firm. "If we stay here, we die anyway. The Tanzanians are only 50 miles from Kampala. The soldiers are preparing to burn the palace and everyone in it before they retreat." Benjamin nodded. "Tonight, then." "What time?" "Midnight," she said. "When the guard shifts change. Meet me behind the fuel depot near the east gate." The hours leading up to midnight were the longest of Benjamin's life. Every sound made him jump. Every footstep in the corridor sounded like the executioner coming for him. He packed no bags. He took only his medical stethoscope, a reminder of who he was, and a small vial of morphine, just in case he was captured and needed to end his own life quickly. At 11 o'clock, the palace sirens began to wail. A Tanzanian airstrip attack? Or had his escape plan been discovered? Benjamin peered out his window. The sky was lit up by red and orange flares. The distant sound of artillery fire rumbled like thunder, shaking the glass panes of his room. The palace was in a state of panic. Soldiers were running back and forth, loading crates of money and documents onto trucks. Benjamin slipped out of his room, blending into the shadows of the chaotic hallway. He walked briskly, his heart pounding in his ears. He avoided the main staircases, taking the narrow service stairs used by the housekeepers. As he reached the ground floor, a massive hand grabbed his shoulder from behind, pulling him back with immense force. Benjamin's heart stopped. He turned around, his face pale. It was Idi Amin. The president was disheveled. His uniform was unbuttoned at the neck, his eyes were bloodshot, and he held a heavy automatic rifle in his right hand. He looked completely unhinged, sweat pouring down his face. "Where are you going, doctor?" Amin growled, his voice thick with alcohol and madness. "The enemy is at the gates. They are shelling my city. I need you. I need my medicine." Benjamin swallowed hard. He looked at the giant man, the monster who had terrorized an entire nation, now looking like a cornered animal. "I was going to the medical clinic, Mr. President," Benjamin said, forcing his voice to remain calm and professional. "The shelling, there will be wounded soldiers. I must prepare the bandages and the painkillers for you and your men." Amin stared at him, his breathing heavy. For a second, Benjamin thought the dictator would see through the lie. He thought Amin would raise the rifle and pull the trigger. Instead, Amin's face softened into a strange, childlike expression of fear. He grabbed Benjamin's coat, pulling the young doctor close. "They want to kill me, Benjamin," Amin whispered, his voice trembling. "The British, the Tanzanians, my own people. They do not understand. I am the father of this nation. I made them strong. Why do they hate me?" For the first time, Benjamin felt a strange mix of horror and pity. The man before him was not a god, nor was he an invincible giant. He was a deeply sick, broken human being who had allowed absolute power to destroy his mind. But pity could not erase the blood of the hundreds of thousands of innocent people Amin had murdered. "We must do our duty, sir," Benjamin said quietly. "Let me go prepare the clinic." Amin slowly let go of Benjamin's coat. He nodded, his eyes vacant. "Yes. Go. Prepare the medicine. We will fight them. We will eat their hearts." Benjamin turned and walked away. He did not run, though every muscle in his body screamed at him to sprint. He walked down the corridor, through the back doors, and stepped out into the pouring rain. The cold rain washed over his face, snapping him back to reality. He ran through the dark gardens, staying close to the hedges, until he reached the fuel depot near the east gate. Sarah was there, huddled under a metal overhang, shivering from the cold and fear. Beside her was a large, rusty military transport truck. The engine was idling, releasing a thick cloud of diesel smoke into the rainy air. A man in a muddy military uniform stepped out of the driver's side. It was Sarah's uncle. He did not say a word. He walked to the back of the truck, opened a small, rusted metal hatch underneath the main flatbed, a space meant for storing spare tires and tools, and pointed inside. It was tiny, dark, and smelled of grease and rust. "Get in," the uncle whispered. "We have to pass through 3 checkpoints. If you make a sound, we are all dead." Benjamin helped Sarah climb into the cramped space. She curled into a ball, tucking her knees to her chest. Benjamin climbed in after her, the metal hatch closing behind them, plunging them into absolute, suffocating darkness. The space was so small they could barely breathe. The heat from the truck's exhaust pipe began to warm the metal floor, making the air thick and stifling. The truck began to move. Every bump in the road sent a jolt of pain through Benjamin's body as he was bounced against the hard iron walls. He held Sarah's hand, her grip so tight his fingers went numb. The truck slowed down. Benjamin felt his chest tighten. The first checkpoint. Through the thin metal walls, Benjamin could hear the muffled voices of soldiers. They were shouting, their voices tense and angry. He heard the sound of heavy boots walking around the truck. A soldier tapped the side of the vehicle with the butt of his rifle. The metallic clang echoed inside the dark compartment like a bomb going off. Sarah let out a tiny gasp of terror. Benjamin quickly placed his hand over her mouth, holding her close. He closed his eyes, his heart beating so hard he was sure the soldiers outside could hear it. After what felt like an eternity, the truck's engine revved, and they began to move again. They had passed the first gate. They rode for hours in that dark, hot metal coffin. The smell of diesel fumes was sickening, and Benjamin felt dizzy, his head throbbing with pain. He knew they were heading east, toward the border of Kenya. But would they make it before the border was closed? Would they survive the journey? Suddenly, the truck came to a harsh, screeching halt. Benjamin and Sarah were thrown forward against the metal wall. Outside, the sound of gunfire shattered the night. Rapid popping sounds of automatic rifles, followed by the deep boom of an explosion. The truck engine died. Benjamin held his breath. Had they been ambushed by rebels? Or had Amin's secret police caught up with them? He heard shouting, the sound of running feet, and then, silence. The silence lasted for minutes that felt like hours. Then, the metal hatch was slowly unlocked from the outside. The door swung open, and the cool, fresh morning air rushed in, accompanied by the bright, golden light of the rising sun. Benjamin blinked, his eyes adjusting to the light. Standing outside the truck was Sarah's uncle, his face covered in sweat but wearing a wide, beautiful smile. "We are across," the uncle whispered, tears in his eyes. "We are in Kenya. You are safe." Benjamin crawled out of the compartment, tumbling onto the soft, wet grass. He looked around. The rolling green hills of the Kenyan border stretched out before him under a clear blue sky. The air was clean, free of the smell of cordite, fear, and death. Sarah crawled out after him, collapsing into her uncle's arms, weeping tears of pure relief. Benjamin stood up, his body aching, his clothes covered in grease and mud. He looked back toward the west, toward the blue mountains of Uganda. In the distance, he could see a thin column of black smoke rising into the sky. Kampala was falling. The reign of the butcher was finally coming to an end. Idi Amin would flee Uganda shortly after, dying in exile years later, never facing a courtroom for his crimes. But for Benjamin, the victory was not in the dictator's fall, it was in the survival of the human spirit. Benjamin looked at his hands. They were dirty, but they were steady. He had refused to become a monster. He had refused to let the darkness consume him. He had survived, and he had his humanity intact. He looked at Sarah, then at the open road ahead of them. He knew that the physical wounds of his country would take decades to heal, and the emotional scars would never truly vanish. But as he took his first steps into a free world, Benjamin realized that even in the presence of absolute evil, hope cannot be executed. The light of a single candle, held by a brave soul, will always be stronger than the deepest darkness.